Welcome to Renaissance Charge Videos. I'm Rick Friedrich, and today I have a few coils set up here that I want to talk about. This is exactly how I had it set up at my last meeting last week, and so we'll talk about that today. So today we want to look at multiplying the energy out or capturing some of the available energy from the transmitter. And this is my resonance induction coupler kit that's on my r-charge.com website. So what I was trying to do today was just another one to hook up here. I want to read from a post that I just put on the overunity.com page, because it touches on some important points, and I'm dealing there with a particular skeptic, and you'll understand the context as I read it. So what we want to look at is a few things. Let's see, I'll read through this, but I should touch on a few things first about this setup here. So the first thing to note is I did have two more coils of these 6-inch coils here, but I had to give them to the customers. In fact, I forgot to send these to the guys, or give them to the guys that were there. They were supposed to get them. But it gives me one more chance to show this in video, because we didn't actually video it. What we did, the video was done in the first meeting, and I didn't have this quite set up. In fact, I never really got it set up completely. Now this is just showing the very bare bones basics. So when I get this all tuned just right in the spacing and so forth, one of the things that we want to do is on these bigger coils here, we would also want to put an adjustable capacitor and tune it in and just get them all just right, so that we can actually discharge or slow down or lower the input. Like right now we're at 72 milliamps at 12 volts, so this is a 3/4 watt. Now I do have this ferrite rod in here that has made that go down. So now it's 76. And of course this is the load here. So we can keep adding these loads in here. And then keep lowering it down. And I think I showed that in California. And in recent expo, I brought it down to 0.004, so 4 milliamps at like 4 volts or something was one of the setups I had publicly. So we'll leave it at there. And I'll bring the camera around, you can see all this stuff. So ideally, well, I guess I'll be talking about that in this transcript here. But I'll talk about the light meter, or not the light meter. I will talk about the light meter. I'll talk about the LCR meter here. Actually, first what I'll do is I'll just show the scope. This is a 1,000 times probe. So I'm going to put this on the hot section. I'm not going to bother connecting the ground. I can do that, but it's already grounded. And you can see that, oops, timed out. So we got 400 and almost 500 volts here, peak to peak. So there's the ground connected. Because this is all grounded anyway, I don't need to. Now, I was hooking this up to one outlet, and there was no ground, excuse me, there was no ground in that outlet, and so this performed very poorly. There was very little power, so the ground made a significant effect. I don't really want to unplug it and plug it all in without the ground to show that, but I will show another ground. Well, I might as well do that before I forget to do that. So here I have a microphone here. Here I have another wire which I've connected into just one prong here so I don't electrocute myself. So if we take a coil, we can see that it gets significantly brighter as I connect it up. So like this was the one I guess I was going to show. So if you could see the angle here. So here's one that's not even facing the right way. I mean, I'll turn off the lights later on and we'll look at that, but I can't really move around because of the microphone here. Very easy. Anyway, the reason why I have it up here and at my meeting was not to show that not just to show that there's nothing underneath there, but that I could actually do another whole layer like this. And so you can see that one was down on the bottom layer and was farther out than these. So I can just keep going. I can do another layer up here, and there'll be a little bit of an angle that's not in the field. And then this whole area is even stronger on the bottom below it. So normally you think of the transmitter in this way, you know, with the receiver coil. Anyway, so those are the few points I wanted to mention. Oh, the LCR meter. Well, we'll get to that. I'll put this right here so I don't forget. The reason for this particular setup, and really a big emphasis in the kit itself, is to duplicate what Don Smith demonstrated for years and mentioned many times on page 153 of my book, the Don Smith Magnetic Resonance Energy Crafting Systematic Index. So this particular picture, which has been on the internet for many years, there is a primary coil here that is 10 turns and it's 3 inches in diameter. And then the secondary, but then there's 3 other secondaries, and they're all duplicating the same energy. And he said, well, you could fill room full of them. So just as Don wanted to finally have a 400-page book, really nice, I did that last year, and now I decided to show this, that you could literally fill a room full of these coils. Now I have, I think, about 75 coils all here. Some of them I didn't have time to put all the capacitors on there. I really ran out of time. I've got to go to a meeting tonight, so I can't spend too much time on this, and I may return back to this, but I've got to ship out these coils too. So you can see in my book cover that I did have some coils displayed in different arrangements, and like in this one you can see these stainless steel balls here that I was using as grounds. And so if I did that to every one of these, I mean, I could hook them all up to the same ground, but then people would be like, well, is there something happening with that particular ground wire? But if you connect them all, you could either connect them up to individual grounds, or like yourself, for example, if I touch this, as a ground, I end up making it brighter. And of course not diminishing the transmitter, which we're down to 64 now. So it's probably, you know, due to my hand too coming in the area. That's going up. Depending on how I tune it, your frequency can go up or down as you add internal loads. And actually the other thing is this coil got quite a beating, I guess, on its way home from North Carolina, and so it's pretty pathetic. It's not very square. Some of the wires are kind of overlapping each other over here. And I'll show a close-up when I'm done this video here. So anyway, so Don's vision is realized, and this is at a safer level. Those coils that he was running there were really high voltage, and he was doing quarter wavelength as well, and that's not my object here, because this is what I just want to do this on a very safe level. So of course I'm not trying to claim that these little LEDs are any significant output. I could add bigger LEDs there to each one of them and power them, but these were the ones in the kit. So I wanted to just show everybody, oh wow, you know, you can add more and more coils, and they're not each one absorbing the energy as people keep claiming. So I just wanted to show this at a safe level, and this way you can actually see as you move in and turn it and so forth, you can see it getting brighter and dimmer very noticeably, so you can learn these relationships. And that's the whole point of this kit, is getting familiar with resonance and so forth at a safe level. So so right now I have 8 of the big coils running these 3-watt bulbs here, and no, they're not at full brightness. They're, depending on, they're all at least half a watt of energy. Now the point of this paper here is to show that the major focus that I'm bringing up today is that you can't prove anything with a video. So I'm not trying to prove anything to people here. This is going to be a major point that I make here. Don't play the game that you should allow yourself to be convinced of anything. But if we had, you know, I had 18 guys see this exactly the way it was, and at my last meeting, and they could look at that up close, and actually they helped me put all the coils around. So you'll see the picture that I show from the meeting, North Carolina, and you know, the guys who attended that literally spent a couple of hours putting all the little capacitors. These are parallel tank circuits, by the way. So there's a capacitor in parallel with the inductor here, and it's a 100 picofarad capacitor. It's nice. It's a nice capacitor here. It's a 600 volt one, so it's a little bit better quality than I had before in the kit. And then in parallel to that is just the LED. And the same is true with these big coils. What I did was I made the inductance, the same inductance for all 3 coils here. So the big transmitter I made is about 152 microhenries. And so that way we could use the same capacitor. Now, this one is not quite, depending on where that wire falls off the top there, you know, it changes its inductance a little bit. So I have, excuse me, a variable capacitor, a really nice one there, so I can tune it. Now I didn't tune it today. I just left it the way I had it at the meeting. So we can get some better results as I tune everything and what have you. But this was not my objective to, I'm not trying to prove anything here. I'm just trying to give some, suggestion for people if they want to try this sort of thing. So this is not the way we would do it. We would do it with this way. So if you have this small coil here, this is actually quarter wavelength. This was an actual product. It's got the center ground tap, and the turns are reversed on the secondary from each other, clockwise and counterclockwise, as you can see on the outside here. So I actually use this coil and bigger ones for my experiments, which are not public. Anyway, so that's what you would ideally want to do, is have your secondary inside your primary, or you could have it outside. And that way all the magnetic flux passes through the secondary, unlike these that are just getting a small angle of the radiation. So you could still do all this with a proper primary secondary that would be right inside, and then it would be also a quarter wavelength. So so I just wanted to point that out, unless I don't get back to it. Yeah, so the LCR meter, you can make your own. I just chose the radio frequency band right in the middle at 1.25 megahertz around. This case it's 1.153. So these coils are more at resonance, about 1.25. So in order to get these bigger ones in resonance, I had to go down quite a bit from what I usually have. And so there's all sorts of relationships here. And what I've said often is, if you could have glasses that could see the capacitance in one lens and the magnetism in the other, you'd be quite amazed, especially what you would see right here. But you would see how much things are influenced just by your body and all the other objects in a room. So anyway, I'm reminded of my friend who was an MRI technician, and he talked to me about how precise everything and how clean of environment it had to be to do all these things. They had to make specialized equipment to avoid, contaminating the process, if you will. And so here, like I said, we're not putting those lenses on right now and making sure everything's perfect. It's just how many can I get on the table and so forth. And of course they're not actually at the right angle. If I go square with that, I'm going to get a brighter light as well. I thought, oh well, I could cut a little piece of wood and mount it or put it underneath every one of them, but I could go on. I could spend a whole day setting this up and doing all that. It's not my point, because like I said, I'm not really trying to prove anything. I could make something look sensational and have like 100-watt bulbs running if I faked it. And what good would that do? But the point is, you can't tell if I'm doing something wrong anyway, and you shouldn't be able to trust that. And those of you who know me personally probably trust me, but I don't expect anybody else to. Those of you who have the kit and have done this more or less, it's not a big deal for you. So again, for those who are like, well, I just don't believe it because of this, that, and the other thing, and it's not my point. So with that, I was still going to get to this LCR meter. So what you want to do is, like in this case, I've already got the values worked out for you. So if you wind a coil, and then you connect up the LCR meter, it will automatically tell you when you turn it on the inductance, and then also on this particular one, the Q value at various frequencies. So most of the LCR meters will do that. And then what you do is you go, if you want to, you can do the calculation yourself or go to like an online calculator and find out the resonant frequency with a given capacitor and at a particular frequency. And this, like I said, you have the one around 152 microhenries at excuse me, I got this tickle in my throat, at 100 picofarads and approximately right now 1.15, but 1.25 normally. So we're kind of out of resonance a good bit for all these other coils in order to make these ones more in resonance with the primary. So the primary, if I adjust that a little bit and then I adjust the frequency a little bit, I could probably get it better and all that. So that's the basics of an LCR meter and what you need to do along those lines. So now not every frequency, not every combination of capacitor, inductor is ideal. So in this case, it's pretty much ideal with this capacitor value and this inductor value to have that frequency. I've tried a whole bunch of capacitors, and this is pretty much the best area that you want to work with. So don't fool yourself into thinking that, oh well, yeah, because there's infinite numbers of values of inductance and capacitance that can be put in resonance, that therefore doesn't matter which one. So this is one of these things that where things get really sensitive and details matter. And there's of course a whole science in that. So let's go on. So we have this overunity.com, and there's a particular forum about confirming overunity devices, and I take objection to the title of that because you can't really confirm things that are on video or through the internet. You can only confirm things personally, and sure, you can report it, but that does not confirm it for anybody else. It's only a personal confirmation. So I posted the picture and I said some details because guys were talking about the kit there, and I thought, hey, I'll just throw this up there and encourage people, I guess, and all that. And of course I'm going to get some severe attacks and some thank yous, and it's always going to be a mixture. You're going to have people who just hate the truth, or some people who just can't believe it. And like I said to them, hey, I'm not expecting you to believe it. So it's kind of a new twist for people to hear this. I'm not trying to defend belief in this, because I can only recommend people figure these things out for themselves. And I've just provided kits to do that help people because they've asked for it. And the latest one is to bring up all these scandals that I have been entrenched with Bedini camp, and so I always have to deal with that, and that's one of the reasons why I've done some of the videos to explain that, and it's just something I'm going to have to deal with the rest of my life. And so people are going to just reject anything that I say because I had some association with Bedini in the past, and I can understand that too. And then there's the other guys that worship Bedini and they're my competition, so naturally they're going to attack me with their lies, which I've already long exposed. Anyway, let's go on with it. So I said hi G, the guy's name, I forget how to pronounce it, but I'll just call him G. I guess you didn't read my point. There is no reason for anyone to believe anyone's testimony on this or any forum. why do you think I was trying to convince you? Now I can easily convince you on the non-testimony points, whether you verbally admit it or not. But you can follow this along in, maybe I'll put a link up to it so you can follow along and read it. And for those of you who don't speak English very well, you can see this. This is word for word for what I'm reading off of. It's on the page, and I'll try and provide the link there to the transcript that I'm reading from. So if I don't speak clear enough, you can read it along. And some of these points you'll want to actually pause and think upon, and I'll probably be reading this too fast right now. So I can easily convince anybody of these points here that are non-testimony related, which I'm going to cover here with conventional theory itself, or actually we'll call it more mainstream theory, not conventional, because conventional theory actually encompasses all the stuff that I do as well, but you just have to find it in the particular applications. But mainstream thinking does not include this as possible. So there's a big difference, and I'm going to touch on that in here. So, but I would think anyone to be credulous to believe a mere statement, even if I had pictures. So if you just believe even this video or this picture, then you would be a credulous or a gullible person just to believe it. And so that might sound insulting to people, and they're like, well, hey Rick, I want to believe what you want to say. Well, why do you want to believe? It's just as bad to want to believe something. Wanting to believe that someone's telling the truth, that's fine, but it's still not enough reason to believe what they're saying. So believing without supporting video may be a little less credulous, but it still is credulous. It still is believing before you ought to. Now, if we look carefully at your position in these matters, with your insistence upon measuring the LEDs, you want to measure these bigger LEDs here, and your questions to me in that respect, we find that you show your skepticism bent. Why? Why did I say that? He instructed me to measure these. I told him the measurement, and he still rejected afterwards my statement. So this was his condition that I measure. I measured it, and he said, sorry, I still believe, right? So notice I answered your point in that measurement is a half a watt each. It is sometimes 3 watts when I put the ferrite coil in the transmitter, which also brings down the input to 0.5 watts. So we're almost, we're pretty much at 0.5, 60 milliamps, 12 volts. It's getting down there. It's almost at half a watt input. There were a total of 15 of these, as I had 4 smaller coils, and 1 ferrite rod. And in the picture I didn't show the 10th coil because I could place it there on the top or underneath. 1 under the table, 4 on the top, 10 big coils, 4 smaller, and 1 ferrite on ferrite. There were approximately 75 small coils with LEDs, totaling over 2 watts total energy. I mean, I'm looking at these right now, and they're pretty much, they're a little bit brighter than the way I had them at the meeting. And, obviously, there's differences between where they're exactly put, but adding them all up, generously, I'm saying somewhere between 2 and 3 watts if you were to measure them all. And again, I can put another layer here, another layer there, and here a layer, there a layer, everywhere a layer. So we have at least 8 watts of measured power with 75 watt or 0.75 watts or less input. Right now, obviously less. All 18 people at the meeting could see that I could continue to add more and more coils with loads which only brought the input down. So now you are stuck here in your skepticism because I have explained what I have done in the pictures, and you have decided to tell everyone that if you refuse to believe this testimony, that complies with your condition of belief. Your conditions of belief. So in other words, all I had to do apparently was tell him that each one of these is a half a watt, and that was good enough. The fact is that with skeptics like you, no matter what you tell me or anyone to do, you will always choose to disbelieve a claim. So this sounds like I'm really against his skepticism, right? Listen on. Now, I am saying that no one should believe any claim or picture or video posted on this forum, this or any forum. So I'm not actually disagreeing with skepticism. That is proper. But when he actually made the claim, well, let me just read what I said. No one should believe anything without sufficient reason. You would be gullible to do so. However, I find you contradict yourself in that you appear to propose to me the idea that you would be convinced of my statement that there was overunity in the setup if I measured the bulbs and found them to total more than the input. I did just that, and you respond that you are not yet convinced. This gives an overall extra output. I complied with your request, measurements, and your response is blanket disbelief with no reasons given other than sorry. What is sorry but an emotional reason? I find that fascinating. What I'm doing here is exposing the fundamental mistakes people are making here on the forums. People like you are sharing your disbelief of claims with the impression that if sufficient testing is revealed through what? Pictures, video, and testimony with acceptable metering, that you'll be convinced? Is that not fair to say, G? Are you not telling everyone that you may be convinced of something here on this forum like that? Or is this all word games with people? Which it is with a lot of these people. Now, I don't know G's motives or where he's at, but I'm just like calling it out as it presents itself. You can deal with it. This is not insulting anybody or anything. This is just matter of fact. We've got to deal with the fundamentals. So my question is more fundamental. Why do you give the impression to anyone like me that you could be convinced of any overunity claim or free energy claims, or whatever words you want to use to describe this supposedly impossible thing? Why do you give this impression that you'd be convinced of this if these kinds of these conditions would be met? That sounds like a game to me. That sounds credulous also. Why would you believe any claim when no amount of pictures, videos, or testimony ought to be believed through an online forum, when only real and live witnessing, experiencing can produce rational conviction? So you see, I'm not expecting you or anyone to believe my story, even though you all think that I'm doing that by presenting this. You just assume that. I merely offer it up as a possibility, as I know my setup was a focus here on that forum. And at least one customer may especially benefit from the details that I'm presenting by the pictures. So then they could actually, this is what happens with my videos, my customers then replicate to themselves, to their own satisfaction, or if they don't replicate it, I end up talking to them on the phone and troubleshooting. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Again, my points are, number one, this is the thesis here. Number one, no one should believe any testimony in the form of words, pictures, or videos coming from an online forum, because such cannot be conclusively proven to be real. This is hard to accept, but it is true. You can get hundreds of people, or you can pretend to be hundreds of people to give a testimony. I mean, testimonies are a dime a dozen in the last 50 years in this country and elsewhere. They're easy. The cults are based up of testimonies of people professing something good, lying to themselves and everybody else. We have liars everywhere, people mistaken. We have what have you. You can't accept testimony in such, well, it's kind of trivial matter. It's not really trivial, but you just can't accept scientific claims based upon mere testimony. You have to establish some live testing. And people testify in court lie all the time too. It's a little bit more serious there. So that's a lot more credibility there, and you can establish more things. But when you're talking online, forget it. You can't establish. The people online become like animals. It was like when I was a kid and I took driver's ed, and there's this video of Goofy cartoon. He's this nicest guy, and he gets into the car and he becomes this animal. And this is what people are behind their computer screens. They become just completely different. They escape into another reality and pretend to be something else. And this is the problem that we deal with now in this cyber day and this smartphone day. Anyway, number two, you imply that you imply that that is not correct or reasonable. You suggest that if I provide something to this effect, that you will believe the claim. Right? This is my contention with him here. This is a correction. This is not a correction of skepticism itself. It's a correction of arbitrary skepticism that is contradictory to its promises and claims. 3. Once your conditions were fulfilled, you still refuse to believe a claim, with the acceptance of that being a mere refusal, rather than for a reason of there being a non-fulfillment of your conditions. I heard none of that. Now, obviously, I didn't get some big response, and there may be more details, but he merely said, given what you have shown, if you provide the bulb power levels, then it would be believable. But it turns out, in fact, he still refused to comply with what he had said previously. And maybe he's realizing that my first premise is right, that you should not believe anything. And when it comes down to it, he doesn't want to believe it. So no matter what I show, even in person, he would still probably just believe it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're on an OverUnity list forum for a long time, there's so many things that prove OverUnity on that forum. If you experiment for yourself, it's very easy to make many of these systems work. If you're on there for years, you know, and you're not getting anywhere, then generally somebody like that is not being sincere. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So these are the games everyone is playing on these forums. You are still being too vague about what you were trying to accomplish by all this. Notice the title of this thread: Confirmation of OverUnity devices and claims. So you suppose there can be actual confirmation of such by one additional testimony? How about 2? How many people would it take? What level or kind of testimony is enough for others to have enough confirmation for it to be reasonable to believe something? These are very important points to bring up. The nature of evidence and proof. You see, there is never enough testimony for anyone to do that in this circumstances over the internet. You can only confirm for yourself. So the games going on here are merely evidence of credulity and incredulity. Now, it is perfectly fine to offer up schematics and show people what they can try for themselves. If that was the only suggestion, that would be fine. But that is not only what is going on here. Most people assuming that sufficient evidence can be presented through pictures, video, and words to convince themselves of claims, while others like you suggest the same, but will never actually be convinced, even if people fulfill your conditions. So this ends up being a needless tension game, as one person has revealed to me. And you know, the newbies at this just like don't understand how to process this. I come into this with background in philosophy and logic and reasoning, so I'm immediately looking at, oh wait a second guys, there's some fallacies going on here. And I will continue the fallacy teachings in a bit. I've started a whole new website for that, but I'm going to be presenting the school and all these things in the future. But here I'm going to apply some of the rules of evidence that people need to be adhering to, otherwise they're just all over the place. So you misunderstand me again in that I'm not a salesman in what I said. I am not saying that people have to buy parts from me. I'm just saying that if you have that I have zero ability to judge another person's work while not being there. So I can't, there's some other guy trying to replicate some of this with different parts, and he's making some mistakes here and there, and it's like, I'll explain myself here. Even with my own parts, it's very hard to ensure people are doing things right, like over the phone, talking to people. I have many years of experience with many people doing these kinds of experiments or otherwise electrical testing, where I've spent hours with them over the phone troubleshooting or on the groups, which I don't do anymore. I don't have time for, except in this exception that I'm doing it. When I ran all these groups, I spent countless hours helping thousands of people all over the world with the motor setups. And with this now, I spend the time with my customers if I need to go over things. So just last week will be an example. I had customers bring in their setups of my systems. After talking with them for hours, and in some cases looking at their pictures and videos, I still did not discover mistakes made because of the assumptions. When they brought in their setups to the actual meeting, I had them actually set them up and display them for the whole time. So now when they set them up, now in the real world, I was then able to have carefully look them over to see some mistakes that more or less affected functionality. So I didn't say all these things without justification of many years of experience in technical troubleshooting and being owner and moderator of technology forums. I have done this full-time for 15 years now. So I'm not backing out of somebody's replication. It's just I don't really have a whole lot of confidence when I'm not there, because there's always little things that you can't see or missing, or once you get in their environment, you're like, oh, wow, you live right beside a cell phone tower. You know, I mean, this is just something that came to my head. No wonder this is happening, or something like that. So to clarify my comments about finding mistakes in Itsu's setup, as he has done much more since when I examined his details, you know, some weeks back, I didn't think it would be right to refer to my observations from back then. it would be better for me to look at his latest work, which I may not get the chance to do because I don't really have a whole lot of time to go onto these forums. My point in mentioning his mistakes is not to discredit his claims, but to draw attention to the problems of the fundamentally wrong assumptions of these forums, and specifically in this case, that you cannot confirm or disprove a claim of another, especially by changing the details, in this case the parts. And deeper than this, that the claim and counterclaim should not be believed anyway in this place, the forum, through online means. But if I did assume that a counterclaim should be believed with sufficient enough pictures and detailed testimony from Itsu, then I at least bring up the point that how can I know that he properly made his parts? How can I tell that it is free from fakery? How can I tell that he is able to properly measure and conduct the experiments? I recall him having some differences and also various errors. And because I have not a lot of experience in trying to help people who are not in my presence, I realize that it would be a fruitless effort to try and correct the matter. People who have more time can get into that, but if it's not even using my parts, it's really becoming more and more distant from trying to evaluate my kit. Like, you're not going to evaluate the kit without the kit, my point is not that you cannot make for yourself a resonance induction coupler system, as many have done, but that you cannot evaluate a claim of another person or a kit without having the actual parts and understanding how to use them. Is that not reasonable? Now, I'm not suggesting that the ideas presented in my kit have to be precisely made in a certain way. On the contrary, these processes have been used billions of times over the last 130 years. But someone's failure to understand how to make it work should not persuade anyone of anything. Neither someone claiming that they have confirmed it. For are we basing our beliefs on popularity? Are there not stricter rules for producing rational conviction? This is my screaming point. Where is rational conviction anymore? Where are the rules of evidence? Gone out the window. Create your own reality. Believe whatever you want in this day. It doesn't really matter anymore to people. So it does. When you go to the edge of the cliff, if you apply that logic, you may be in for some trouble and fall off the cliff to the ground. And your particular feelings don't matter in that case. This is the next step. This needs to be settled first. This is the point. In any forums, otherwise we have mass confusion that leads to what we find throughout the free energy community, and indeed throughout modern culture. And there's just a massive confusion and unsettledness with people because they have no firm foundation. This is why I'm going to be doing these volumes over the next couple of years, to lay the foundation of all the fundamental points, instead of just looking at the issues that we face in life through emotion, through cultural familiarity. When we grew up in that culture, we want to defend that culture. Like somebody said to me, where was it? My Australian buddy, I'll refer to him as Rumpelstiltskin, as he calls himself, saying in Australia, if I got him right here, you commit to a team kind of for life. It's like, whoa, that's not a kind of American thing. People can switch around. But this is the idea of party politics and this kind of belief system. Now, I'm going to say here that I didn't say in this paper, I'm going to say in the video here that where's the skeptics? The skeptics used to be rigorously applying logic, and upholding rational conviction, even if they didn't necessarily conform with it themselves. But where are they in the free energy community, bringing out the laws of evidence and criticizing credulity and incredulity. Where are they? And as part of what you need to come clean, okay, so I'm talking about the skeptic now. As part of what you need to come clean with, everyone, exactly what you are doing here in this respect. Where's your real point here? Are you really suggesting that through the forum you can actually come to a rational conviction about something and conclude on a matter? Or are you giving that impression and not really believing that? You got to be clear on that. And everybody has to be. And in that case, you might see some of these people just disappear because they'll be like, oh, or they'll continue on for other motives. Again, you implied that claims could be believed through this medium, but when your conditions are met, you refuse to believe and merely say sorry as your justification. You need to tell everyone that you will never have sufficient reasons to believe a claim on such forums. And that would be a good thing to do for the reasons I've gave. Or if you say otherwise, you need to say exactly what conditions are sufficient. But if you are set to always disbelieve a claim, even when your conditions are met, then you merely play games with people, as countless skeptics have done. So you need to explain yourself here. Now, of course, the person who brought me to this particular forum, and I told them on the phone the other night what I did, they were like, good, you really need to deal with this guy because such and such. And I won't say who that was. But yeah, it needs to be put in its place. And I've dealt with skeptics because I was a hard skeptic like that for some time. And I know what it's like to be lost in your skepticism. In fact, people who are gullible are just as bad skeptics as those who we think of as skeptics. And those skeptics are just as gullible as the gullible people they think are just merely gullible and not skeptics. So if you actually overbelieve something, you refuse to believe other things at the same time. Don't fool yourself there. You can see here that unless we start upon a solid foundation, then our speculations will be just random and meaningless. All claims and information on forums are merely helpful to the individual to confirm matters for themselves. They elucidate things, but they do not prove anything. It is merely to give ideas to try. It cannot ever produce or disprove anything. Now, I have suggested many things in my long posting that people can try, verify, or disprove to themselves. And I've given many kits for people to play around with as a means for self-verification. This forum has hundreds of suggestions of the same nature. My focus has shifted away from a focus on specific parts. Here's the key point. Yes, when the eyebrows go up and I get this grin on my face, I'm saying something important, as my students point out watching these videos. So there's a point, don't miss it. I am not focused on specific parts like people are. What's the magical combination? So I'm not hoping for magical results from parts. But I'm focused on themes. That's what I presented to the guys. I said, after you get through this meeting, you'll have these, and you digest these themes I've presented. Now you can go through Patrick Kelly's book and find all of his tampering with the illustrations and comments and make actually these things work. Because most of those things are real over Unity, but he just goes in there and deliberately changes up the wording and doesn't give you a full picture, so you're left trying to follow the instructions, pulling your hair out. So once you get the themes down, and that's why resonance is one of the themes that you got to master, and that's why I did this book here. And the title itself has like 5 or 6 themes in it, and that's why I presented related themes, where you understand key processes and then can make any parts dance for you. And so that is the point that needs to be settled too, is a shift away from oh, well, maybe I could just do some magical things with these parts, and if I eventually stumble across these, special relationships, maybe I'll get something. Well, good luck. I know guys who tried to do that for 30 years and wandered around in a parts approach rather than a themes approach. Now with the themes, like I said, you can go back, you can evaluate whether a free energy system is pretty much possible, whether someone's making a fundamental mistake because they're in violation of essential themes, like the idea of an open system. When you understand what that means, which I've covered many, many times, what does it mean to be open? And actually in my previous comment that was really lengthy, I talked about it. If you have a closed system, you're not going to get a free energy system. This is automatically what all these skeptics do, is they automatically close it and don't consider the environment, all these factors. So once you get the themes right, you can make it work. And that's my goal, is for you to be able to go in your house, grab some parts, and put them together and make them dance for you, as I said. It's my new phrase. And what I also focused on was, now you can take your appliances, and while they're running, like I showed with the plasma tube, that I can produce pretty much all my energy needs just from that plasma column that is like $30. And maybe I'll make a kit one day, as I show in my meetings, once I can get some of the costs down on the plates, which I have. I'll just try and work on that eventually as a kit. But here you have the plasma ball or tube or ball still functioning. It's still going to give joy to the kids who love to play or just look at these lights as a night light and what have you. 8 watts input and a lot kilowatts output. And you're not depleting its primary purpose. And that's one of the practices of Don Smith, is on all of his input, he was never really loading it down. Now sometimes, like here, I'm loading it down, well, not electrically here, but I could load it down electrically too. But that's the key. And so again, in the end, I want you all to be able to understand the themes, which it literally was 24 hours. I have 24 hours of video that I took of the first meeting. And there was kind of a private meeting that we had where we continued filming. So 24 hours of footage on this. I really crammed in all of these points and themes. And I think everybody was very well satisfied. The most important thing in those meetings, though, being the relationships of people afterwards, which have been far more important than the content itself, which I'm very glad for. That is very rewarding for me to see that. We're not talking about people hooking up and getting married, because there's no women at these meetings anymore. There's only been a few over the years that have showed up, but we're talking about just guys like the olden days of the ham radio, guys, if you will, which only a few exist nowadays, where they're just kind of getting to know each other and starting to do projects together. So anyway, again, it is important experimentally to understand by experience resonance and related ideas. But even before that, unless the bias principle is forsaken, unless you forsake prejudice and bias, confirmation bias, and all related ideas, no matter what you do, you will fail in this and in any matter of investigation. You're going to fundamentally fail. And I don't hear anybody really saying that on any level. Nobody's really talking about that anymore. Nobody really cares about the truth. I'm going to say nobody, I don't mean like every single person, but in general, generally speaking. Unless you can overcome the bias of mainstream restrictions, which is like seeing everything with two-dimensional lenses rather than 3D, you will fail. You will not look where you do not expect to see, right? You will disbelieve even what you see, even if you're not willing, you will disbelieve even what you see if you are not willing to see it. Now, I'm not talking about deep down. Deep down, people know when they're lying or not. In their sober moments, the truth always comes back to them. So they know deep down, and I talk to people at that level all the time, which is shocking to do for people. And you will refuse to admit even what you know to be true. You will fight against it. I don't want it to be true, but I know it's true. I don't want it to be true. Why? Because you have a job. You're a professor. How many of you are professors who know it's true, this stuff, but you cannot profess that? I happen to know a master's level physicist who a major paper is coming out right now, and his name is not on it, even though he contributed very much to that and would have been on it if he had not taken the stand of free energy. And his professor even admitted to him that yes, it's true, but we can't go there. And when he continued to press that and make this a calling of his own to promote that subject, he was removed. So that's the cost he decided to. So instead, he could have been very well known with a very important paper, and that means everything. But how many others will refuse to do that? Not just in this matter, but in so many other matters. Like, for example, even in creationism, there are many, many professors who believe in creationism, but they will not dare challenge the evolutionary, and we're talking about macroevolution, Darwinian, or the punctuated equilibrium types of evolution. They are not willing to sacrifice. And when they actually do publish something that confirms the creationist model, they get themselves in a lot of trouble from fellow evolutionists, even if they still maintain their evolutionary. Like, for example, the publishing of the relatively recent DNA in the T-Rex findings, I believe it was, a couple of years ago. And those evolutionists got a lot of flack from fellow evolutionists for publishing something like that. So these are the foundations which you cannot bypass. All bypass is merely a foolish game, wasting everybody's time. Or on your end, if you can somehow prove vaguely implied claim that resonance is merely a transformer or accumulation process, and that there cannot possibly be environmental gain, then you will prove most of the chatter on this forum to be foolishness, as indeed many believe of these types of forums on free energy. So get the point. You go to Wikipedia, look up resonance, you will see they will actually use the word transformer. Now, many people will not say that because they know it's flatly not true. So the idea that, of course, input always has to match output, so obviously if your voltage is going to go up, your amperage would have to go down. Or the other way around, with the amperage going up and the voltage would have to correspondingly go down. So that's the one error. And the other one is this accumulation process, that resonance is merely a gain in the sense of you're creating accumulative energy, and then you kind of just burst out and use it at the end of this accumulation. This is also wrong, and it's also a misunderstanding of the process. So if that's what you believe, that's all you have to show, and then all of this is automatically not even possible. And that's exactly how people conclude. So they don't even try it for themselves, because they just believe it's not possible, so they can't. So this is the foundation point. there is no resonance induction coupler kit proving over unity for yourself if it's not a gain process in itself, or it could never be a gain process. Obviously, those who are hoping to see OU over unity or something beneficial in my setup have to believe otherwise, that resonance is a gain in some way. This is not merely an amplifier gain in the normal amplifier sense. So this is a starting point. Which is it? Can it be proven that resonance is not a gain, that is merely a distribution of volts and amps over time? If so, then what you go into this with is what you will come out with. And when you play the piano, it will be with all dampers locked onto strings. And the added dampers on the high strings that don't normally have them. Not all the strings have dampers on. We'll put those on there too. Or the lower ones. Maybe I'm getting backwards here. Anyway, the ones that don't have it. I don't have a piano in front of me. I should know this. And you remove the soundboard. Oh, and the environment itself. Let's just remove everything and just focus on the string. Welcome to the one-dimensional world of mainstream let me say this right. Welcome to the one-dimensional world of mainstream college-level electronics. That's what it is. That's what I want to call it from now on. Because it's not beyond the college level, and it's not even in conventional theory. Conventional theory, like I said, covers this. Beyond college level will incorporate this technology if you look around enough, or even the commercial world does incorporate this technology but doesn't draw attention to that fact. But don't fool yourselves or anyone into thinking that someone's failure to produce some result can somehow establish that resonance is not a gain for everyone else, especially through the means of an online forum. Anyway, if resonance is a gain in the sense that a series tank circuit, which is the way I have this primary set up, I have the capacitor in series with the inductor going back to the frequency generator. So if resonance is a gain in the sense that a series tank circuit is actually a multiplication or amplification of voltage, while amperage remains the same as input amperage, so circulating amperage stays the same as input amperage, but voltage goes up. Okay, that's not transformer action here. Then that is circulating energy is greater than input energy. All right? Then the gain is seen as the voltage. Oh, wait, okay. Or a parallel tank, which all these are parallel tanks. If I run that as a parallel tank, circuits are a multiplication, and I'm quoting from the textbooks. They are a multiplication or amplification of amperage, and this is where they don't tell this. They don't want to draw attention to this because the students will be like, wait a second, that's more energy. They'll never say, while voltage remains the same as input amperage. Input voltage, I should have said. Then the gain is seen as voltage or amperage divided by input amount. So if I have, here we only had 400 volts, but if I had 5,000 like I showed in the previous coil, or 4,500 volts on my primary, the circulating voltage is 9 volts input voltage, 5,000 volts circulating voltage, but the same amperage as the input amperage. I have quite a big gain there. So I said if I have 9 volts at 25 milliamps input, which is often the way we run this kit, circulating input, and 250 volts at 25 milliamps circulating with the regular frequency generator, right? Or any of them that you have. Then I have 27 times gain. Oh, that's a controversial statement, Rick. That is just false, right? We'll see a lot of dislikes of this video when you see it, because this is hitting it right where it needs to be hit. And if I add the gate driver now, which I have the gate driver here, just a little board, just a MOSFET gate driver, 2 little capacitors on it, like you need according to the data sheet, just doing it the way the data sheet says. And now I have 1300 volts on this little coil. Yeah, and that will give you RF burn with that. So now I have, and it will give you continuous RF burn. It's not building up. It will continue to bite you. Real power. So now I have 144 times gain, and that's where that 144 number comes from, because if you divide 1300 into 9 volts, you've got that number. This follows the idea that of the gain in Q. There's all these terms, and when you're just coming to the subject, you think, oh, well, they really mean a real amplification of energy. But in the end, they take away all that they say about the Q factor, the quality factor. For both parts, cap and inductor, when they're combined, if one of them is a low Q, it brings down the combined Q of the system, as I deliberately did with this kit, to keep things safe. So while the coil has over 100 Q, the capacitor I use is deliberately low, because I don't want you to hurt yourself. I don't want anybody to get burns and all that on their hands, and it's just too much. So, as some textbooks would imply without prejudice, the Q, they would imply this, if you just take the statements by themselves, the Q at a given frequency will determine your gain if you let it do that for you and don't kill it with mainstream circuitry that destroys the process, right? So it can be seen here that what you go into this will be what you get out of it. If you expect this to be merely a transformer process, then the word resonance and words like gain are deceptions and meaningless. It would be better to say about resonance that it's merely a high point or a tune point, which is really the examples they are just giving you with radio analogies, where resonance is merely tuning into the radio station. And so really the idea of resonance itself is completely lost sight of what is really happening. And the most important is the fact that it's a gain. Again, the pianist playing the piano is merely science fiction, as the piano cannot do such things that produce an excess of energy that are non-conservative. Now, my family is very high up in the music world. 3 of my cousins, I believe, play in the Philharmonic orchestras in Europe. And I will ask them one day to maybe talk about this. My cousin is supposedly the best trumpet player in the world, and music is a very big part of my family and has been a big part of my life as well. And just go anywhere in the music world and ask them if resonance to them is not a gain. And they'll have no problem with it. And you can go into the chemistry world too, and other areas, and find the same kind of realization, but only in the electronics world. We say electronics now, not electrical, but electronics world. Suddenly, oh, it's not possible to have resonance be a gain, because we don't want it there. We don't want a gain because that's a problem to solve. Anyway, to create the proper organization for this study of experience surrounding my kit, which assume resonance is a gain, you need to settle these points first. If you do not believe resonance is a gain, then you need to state that is where you're coming from, so that we can see that your goal is not to benefit from the research presented here, but to merely try and show how mistaken people are in these matters. I suggest people start at the beginning rather than play the games that most play. Failure to do that has not only resulted in all the uncertainty people on both sides live with. This is true in all areas of life. Now, the secondary point after the foundation has been developed and adhered to is addressing all the dampeners mainstream practice puts on the piano to kill the resonance gains with specific limited and resonance loads, so that they assume there is but a single body circuit, and Kirchhoff's is a universal law, and gains in local environment are not to be considered. So these are a big statement here. Let me just highlight those points again so that you don't, I didn't read it very well. So the dampeners in the mainstream practice, all the dampeners they put with their particular meters at times that cancel out effects or become part of the circuit and dampen things, or this closed loop idea. If they do not understand the multi-body or many-body approach, then they will only look at it as a single body. And what I mean by that is, so if I just have a closed loop with the inductor here, then you have a single body, and you're not going to get anything out of it unless it's resonating at its own frequency. Then it's a little bit different situation there, because you will have a gain in that case too. But when we think about the capacitance as separated from the inductor, then that loop is a separate loop than the whole loop of the circuit. So you have two bodies in that. And of course, the circulating current is discarded, and they're only looking at the current through the inductor, if they're even doing that. So of course, each part of the circuit has to add up to the input, but that is not the case. If you consider this attached body as another body with its own energy circulation that can be used. So they deliberately discard that. And as I pointed out, when even measuring DC, do you actually consider the turning on and the turning off of the circuit in your measurements? No. So impulse is totally different than pulse DC. You have to make that clear in your head. But you're trying to consider all the environmental factors, to be honest, when you're calculating efficiencies and everything. So if you deliberately discard the environment, the environmental factors like bodies that are loosely attached, in this case the coils here, and you're just going to measure the circuit, and you're going to ignore all the benefit that all the other bodies are receiving, then is that fair? Is that honest? Is that right? No. So that's that one point that you might have missed if I just read that sentence. And the idea of Kirchhoff's law, Kirchhoff's law, I explained in the local environment. So take away all the fullness of life. Oh no, they take away all the fullness of life and want us to believe in only the fundamental key, and urge us to ignore the effects in the real world. So it's a mathematical delusion, oversimplification to do this. They will impulse a motor to create magnetic action, magnetic motor action, and ignore the other half of the energy in the negative spike that could charge a battery, as I have done for years with my motors. I have powered 26-foot boat, lawnmowers, cars, you name it. I had to do it, and I demonstrated it. For those of you who say, oh, I accuse me on this group of not demonstrating these things. Come on, where have you been? I've been doing this for years. They will magnetically impulse an inductor to create an electrical generation in a generator, right? But ignore the magnetic energy produced by the inductor and then just call that merely a reflection of the transmitter. And you don't call it a transmitter in the sense of a generator, but I'm just bringing it to this point here. They will ring a bell with a rubber band around the bell, figuratively speaking, so that you only consider one dampened strike. Ding. Well, all this is dampening this board. That's all there is. That's all the energy. Well, is it? Take off the rubber band and see what happens when you ring a bell. I mean, come on, this is it's so amazing to me that one of the most universally understood things people have with like ringing a bell and the oscillations that occur can really separate those oscillations from the one striking of the bell. And yeah, I pointed out that there are tuning fork free energy devices. And they're about 100 years old in the patents. Anyway, they will load the transmitter so that it is out of resonance. Right? They could do that right now, but whatever. MIT in 2007, will judge the efficiency of resonance induction coupling by placing only one receiver coil in a small percentage of the transmitter's radiation. Only, remember, it drops off, the angle drops off at the square of the distance. So if you're way here, like, what was it, 10 feet or 10 meters away, somewhere around there, what are you really going to get? If I put this coil way over at the ceiling, you know, the angle is way off. And then they will act like that represents the full transfer of energy when many more equal loads could be added with coils, could be added all around the transmitter to show more energy production than that was input. Now, each one of those guys who did that know that, but they were not willing to show that. And you could say the same thing about Walter Lewin. He only showed the reverse voltmeter connection. He didn't attempt to put a load across there to capture that energy, and that probably would have cost him his career if he had. So that was a line that he didn't cross, and that's fine, but at least he showed the concept and what he was saying. But those MIT guys, if they did that, so if they said this is 40% of the energy in this appearing in this bulb from what it took to power at this distance, and then they had another coil at the other side that was also powering its load, they would already be up to 80%. And then obviously if they brought it a little bit closer, they would have easily been up to 100. But they could put another coil on top of that coil, another one beside it, and they could do this whole concept right here. And they would have an excess of energy very easily. So again, if you assume there can only be one receiver coil, then you limit the output by the percentage of the field. You place the coil in and by the square of the distance away from it. But if you are honest, is anybody honest anymore? Well, everybody says they're sincere, but when you press them, it matters. They're like, well, I know I should be doing that, or Oh, that's just my bias. Oh yeah. But if you are honest, you will see that if you are only taking a small percentage out of the output, then you consider it just that. So in other words, if you're just putting one coil way far away over here, well in this case it was this stream going this direction, you're only taking a little bit out of it, then you're deceiving yourself. So I said if you were honest, you will see that if you're only taking a small percentage out of the output, then you will consider it just that. So here, every one of these is just taking a little bit, but is it even taking it? I'm just speaking in a very general way, and I'll talk about that in a second. In my pictures, I am only taking a small percentage of the radiations, and yet I am not even canceling out the radiations of the transmitter beyond the coils that are being influenced by such radiations. So these are actually coming and passing through. The primary transmission is passing through. It's not becoming absorbed into the coil. It's going beyond. It is a little bit more complicated than that, as you can directly capacitively couple to receiver coils as well. So this is where it gets harder to understand. Is this merely a magnetic or a capacitance connection, especially in this near, what I call the near field, or the near field area? What is really exactly happening here? It's vastly fascinating to consider, but that is something to think about. The showing of the two pictures was merely a kind of follow-up of what Don envisioned with his first model with the 4 extra coils off the transmitter, where he said you could fill a room and duplicate the energy, as I said. In fact, Don learned from this very kit, not my kit, because I improved upon it, and I really don't even show all the stuff in the original kit. The original kit just had 2 coils to show you the basics, and made also and talked about Faraday's law in 7 pages, and talked about a what do you call it, a crystal radio. Now so the original kit was just that. Don learned from that, and then came up with, realized this could be amplified, if you will, and went to Tesla, figured all those things out, and built that model. What's interesting in the original instructions of this kit is that it actually refers to receiver coils, and they never sold more than 2 coils, 1 transmitter, 1 receiver. But it's almost like a hint. Hey people, you can power more than 1 coil with this. Well, obviously I've gone to the extreme here. And I don't usually have this much inventory, so I thought I would take advantage of showing this while I had this inventory. But anyway, that was Don's purpose. The point is easily proven by anyone who is not afraid to try. This is not an attempt to prove to others, but rather for encouragement for people to try. But the naysayers lie to the public in presenting in such a way as to imply that only 1 receiver coil can benefit, as if the total energy actually flows from 1 transmitter into the receiver coil, and that is completely false. Obviously, in this case. Of course, there will be no response to these critical and fundamental points I've addressed by those who want to continue playing the games on the forums. They will drown out what I've said, divert this topic to something else, and never want to address these key points. So I've done my part for those who have ears to hear. That's why I'm doing it as a video here, to say, hey, I wipe my hands if you don't want to listen. Be my guest. Again, don't believe my experiments. Believe the points that I'm making here that are addressed as self-evident, like the laws of evidence and some of those things, you all know those to be true. Focus on those, and I don't care if you get free energy or not, because that's minor to those points. Anyway, only proceed. So yeah, only believe. Going back here. Don't believe the diversions, and don't believe any claim for or against. Only believe that which has been sufficiently established to yourself. And only proceed after you establish a proper foundation, which is evident most people are lacking as observed by what is stated and assumed. You don't need my parts to consider any of these things. I just made an AM transmitter coil with decent Q over 100 and focused on a medium frequency of 1.25 megahertz with 100 picofarad standard cap, with low Q for safety. That works well for these experiments. You can see I made two larger coils that had the same inductance, so that the frequency could be used. The 10 coils were slightly off, however. Well, I made 10. I should have said 10, not 2. I made 10 larger coils, which 2 of them are with the customer now. So these were slightly off. These had higher Q and resulted in greater gains. I don't expect you to believe that. Obviously, you can believe they have higher Q, but whether higher Q is a gain, prove it out to yourself. The kit and these bigger coils are not in a quarter wavelength relationship. So I did not make this kit all that it could be. And again, this is off the shelf. Ideally, there would be one secondary coupled, but loosely, through the transmitter, so that all the flux passes through it before continuing on through external receiver coils, like Don Smith's, as shown in the picture, which would represent powering the small, hold on a second. Passes through and continuing through the receiver coil as shown in the picture, which would represent powering the small input power like Don's input wires, from which the battery that were a wavelength of the primary. So what I'm getting at is, if you did this arrangement and had this in the center right now, and you had all these receiver coils, these represent the battery power to the gate driver here. If I have that in a quarter wavelength or harmonic of it, I could then power the load itself. So that's can be done several different ways, and it's easy to show at least the frequency generator being replaced by one of these coils, because the input from the frequency generator is just merely a logic input, so it's not a power input at all. So you could just, once you turn the frequency generator on, you can just connect this up to it and disconnect it altogether. And that's, again, just one of the different things that can be very easily done by people. And one of my students did that like a year ago online, and he showed it online, so I don't need to re-show that. So anyway, if you have a really good positioned coil that is really positioned in a way that has maximum gain from the coil, you could actually separate the all the power altogether, but it's a lot harder to get that exactly right than to actually just do the phase lock looping, which I haven't talked about at all today, but you can actually get these positioned where you can just keep lowering and lowering the input because you are actually making these receiver coils transmitters, and they are influencing in the right phasing. They are influencing the primary, and that's why you can see it go down while the loads continue. And you can get that down to 0 or even go negative. So some of your meters, this one doesn't go, it can't show, it kind of starts blinking at you when you go below 0. But generally these meters just stay at 0. So once it gets down to below 1 milliamp, let's see, 100, 10, 1, yeah. Once it gets below 1 milliamp, then it's not even worth talking about. So let's continue on here and just finish up. Okay, so, but to claim to be estimating the transmitting energy gains by a distant receiver's coil's output that is only influenced by a small percentage of radiation is misleading, as in the case of the MIT demonstration. So my demo was only to show more coils with only a 360 rotation. Now these are above, and I'll have another one below here running as well, which I'll show in a minute. It just has to be better positioned than it is. Let me do that right now and see what happens. Oh look, my hands getting close to it have influenced. See, just by my hands getting in the mix without even doing anything here, suddenly it goes way up. But yet the loads aren't changing. Anyway, let's go on. But this is also to show the relay effect. Relay coils that are also loaded now. That's an important point. Because normally a relay coil is not having a load on it. It's just, it allows you to continue on further away because it becomes a transmitter, not just a receiver. And that's important to understand. So now I was doing a lot of study in the last 2 months on rectennas, and that was a big focus of my last meeting. And so rectennas are tiny antennas converting to DC to power little applications. And this is the future coming up. But they have all this stuff in the many articles and patents on the subject to maximize the gains. So you can learn all these things in that way by studying that technology. So for those of you who want to do the frequency lowering, so for example, we got 1.25 megahertz, and to actually properly run these LEDs, which are not high frequency LEDs, especially these are only taking a fraction of the available energy that these coils are producing because they are not high frequency parts. Remember that too. So those of you who want to like do the Don Smith system and you're still trying to figure out the reactance charts and how to lower the frequency to make the trumpet wave, right? Now what you want to do is just study the rectenna technology and you'll see how they do it. And you get the right parts and all that. So really all the processes from the L2 onward, and even in a sense the L1 onward, in the Don Smith type of coil systems, are all found, all the answers that you need are found in the rectenna technology. So I leave that to you. It's all there. And it's not just in that technology. I can point to a whole bunch of other places. So the goods that is happening in the Don Smith system are really the resonance, magnetic resonance in the primary coil in relationship to the secondary coil with a quarter wavelength connection. And that's where all your gains are happening along with the ground connection. And after that, It's all straightforward, you know, it's conventional. You know, when you got the antennas, the various antennas are your L2, right? And then you have the impedance matching, you know, various rectification, which, for example, I'm finding that a voltage doubler is better than a full wave bridge. So you'll find that in the patents as a innovation, improvement upon the prior art. So anyway, you can do that, and I'll probably end up doing something like that with this kit, frequency reduction, and then you'll actually see on your receiver coils that you can get a whole lot more out, because these are only kind of chopping off. They're not really able to keep up with the high frequency properly. If you get different devices that are RF devices, then you'll see that. And again, if you ground each one of these, you'll get double the power. So even touching these, they get brighter. So here's my actually that one is, that side makes it brighter, that side lowers it. So again, that's a matter of tuning, because these are actually not in tune. The grounding is also a matter of tuning. So me being a ground, I'm also a big capacitance receiver here too. So let's go on. So let me just read that one sentence again. But this was also to show that the relay effect, relay coils that were also loaded, indicating that the receiver coils now become transmitters, and thus the process can start all over again and even power the initial transmitter when properly phased or placed. G, the skeptic guy now I'm talking to, it doesn't take a whole lot of time for you to play around with this setup and drop the input power down to 0 or almost 0. It's up to you to convince yourself. You know, I mean, so if I get this down to 0, then does the measurement really matter? I guess not at that point, because you manifestly have power. Now what I said in the other long, lengthy post on that forum was the black box, we actually did show 0 voltage and 0 amperage, or 0 voltage and amperage across the bulbs with AC meters. AC or DC was 0. When we are really doing that impedance effect, that resonance impedance effect that John talks about in DVD 7 of Energy from the Vacuum video, which everybody missed. Everybody missed, guys. I mean, I was there, so I didn't miss it. Obviously, I knew about it before the video, but I was like speaking on it for years, and nobody realizes it until now I'm saying it. So now, of course, people are going to try and find that DVD and realize, oh wow, John said this back in 2006, I believe it was, when we did that video. But there, and I showed in my meeting the hour-long video that I took of a meeting in Chicago where we first showed this black box, and we ran the motor for an hour straight, and sometimes we ran that all day long at other meetings in Germany, I think. Well, we ran that, and the input battery on the motor stayed the exact same voltage and we ran up to 100 watt LED modules all the while. But the voltage across that, is my point, was 0. So if you were just going to look at the voltage right now, you'd have to look with the scope and see everything. But even then, you're going to be dismissing this because it's a different kind of energy. It's across one wire. It's Tesla one wire concept. And so it's not about your meters. It's about the actual load. And you can determine loads without meters. Like if you're like Robert Adams, in boiling water, you can measure the temperature And of course that's a meter thing, but it's a different kind of meter. Analog meters, if you will, where you're not directly affecting the loads. But even if I did, if I have like this really bright LED, you know, that is rated for 100 watts and is blinding you, and you've got your light meter. So this is a light meter. This is a cheap one that you can get. So if I'm measuring the you know, the flux or the lumens on the light meter, and then I disconnect it and connect it up to a power supply and measure it, and it's the same lumens, there's your meter for you, telling you the actual amperage without putting something directly across the electrical side of it. Oh, but the electrical side says 0. Wait a second. The light meter shows this real light. When I compare it to the other, oh, well, you know, and that's how it works, you know. With people, they can't accept it, even with their own meters. Only certain meters are acceptable, maybe. Or then I've seen some skeptics say, well, you have to have the meter that we have, you know, this spectrum analyzer, it's only $300,000 at our school, and that's the only acceptable equipment. I won't accept anything else. Well, come bring it. Come bring it. You know, I've always said to people, bring their meters. And some people bring their meters. And I happen to know people who are at the top levels in engineering in this world. You name it. I know people in every kind of engineering. I mean, I'm just thinking over all the different kinds of engineering out there. You know, on the electrical side, the RF side, health side of it, you know, all the types of engineering. And so these guys all have the access to the best equipment in the world. So this is not a phenomenon that only happens with cheap meters because you're diluting yourself. You know, we're not using voltmeters, we're using whatever equipment. But I don't want people to feel that they have to have this expensive equipment to do anything. They have to have an oscilloscope. Because I figured out everything I needed to figure out without an oscilloscope at the beginning. I didn't need the oscilloscope. Now, I mean, obviously I use it to get into things, but, and I have all these other meters too, but whatever. So, you know, it's up to you to convince yourself. You ought not to be convinced of any of my pictures, videos, or words, okay? Don't pretend that you should be, and that I haven't provided enough evidence. Because that's really what his point was. That's the point I'm hammering him on. You act like if I just provide enough, then you would believe, and you wouldn't say sorry, you'd believe it. But really, I'm saying you shouldn't ever believe something anyway until you prove it to yourself. So, there's no such thing as evidence through online forums. I mean, that's kind of a little bit sweeping. You can draw attention to evidence that people already know by communicating that to people, but that's still not presenting evidence. So I'm presenting evidence that is not evidence through the internet. By telling them about evidence that's not through the internet, that's still not presenting evidence through the internet. That's a different thing. So you cannot, I stand by that. There's no evidence that you ought to believe through online communication. No such thing. People realize that just because someone says they believe something doesn't mean they are telling the truth to you or even to themselves. You got to realize that. Many skeptics do believe but are afraid to admit the truth. Like I said, professors, you know, losing their careers, losing their reputation. It's very hard to do that your whole life. I mean, my life is trash because I parted company with Badini and they just go around slandering me. And so what? Do I continue with somebody who's lying and, you know, doing stuff to people that is really bad in order to protect my reputation? Well, I guess my reputation was tarnished for being involved with them in the first place too. So whatever, but it cost me quite a bit. So many more of the skeptics are merely trying to draw out more information from you so that you can work for them for free, as they are actually developing this technology. This is probably most of the skeptics are just data mining, either about people, which is my last point. Of course, there's those who are monitoring people as well. So people are monitoring who's succeeding and keeping track of them. That does happen. That certainly happened with me. But also people are trying to, they insult you so that you'll give out more information. It still works on me. And I'm aware of that because it forces you to say more, to prove yourself. But now, for many years I've realized that you can't prove anything online. So if I'm trying to prove something to people through the internet in the way of proving technology works in a certain way, then I'm actually contributing to that delusion of that you should actually believe something that's shared online. Because remember, people can fake videos of you. I mean, there's that old video of Bush, or there's the ones of Obama, one of the more recent one was of, I don't know if it was recent, but the one of the CEO of, or owner of Facebook, Mark, where it's got him saying all these things that were, I think, maybe pretty well true, but he would never have said those things outright. But you can make somebody say anything with that technology. So how much more easy is it to cut and splice video where you stop it and do something? I mean, when I was a kid, we did that with, this is 40 years ago now. We took pictures of us and moved a little bit and moved a little bit. And so it made it look like when we put them all together in frames as a video, it made it look like a video, but it was just actually stills. So you can manipulate any kind of pictures, and this is a very hard thing when it comes to a court of law and you're looking at video, because anything could be tampered with, and it's not hard to do anymore. The last 20 years it hasn't been hard to do. So of course people want to know if there's a wire here or a wire there, and of course I'll show some details of the camera here now, but it's not about that, because still you could never really capture everything and prove there wasn't some other powerful transmitter here. I can turn this off and you can see an instant response, but somebody over there is coordinating with my finger and turning it off right at the same time. That could happen. I mean, how can you know against that? Anyway, the last point is that the skeptics are a lot more sophisticated than you think. And the strategies to get you to fail or be continuously searching for more information and never settling upon anything are a lot more sophisticated than you realize. And I've seen this face to face. I've seen it close up. I know the games they play. Maybe I don't even know all of them. So one guy made in jest on that forum, well, what about the wires under the table? And I confess there are wires under the table in which, well, one of them is this microphone that's going to the camera, which I'm going to have to take off here in order to get up. So bear with me as it goes through my shirt. Sorry about that. But I'm not editing this out because it's a continuous stream of this video. So I will put this down and grab the camera. But the other wires are just the wires powering the frequency generator and the power supply, which I'll show you here. And then we've got this ground wire that's also plugged in which I'll bring the camera around now. Let me get the ground wire again here. So I will put this here and I'll show it with the camera close up. So of course now, how can you tell that they didn't turn off the camera there and splice the frame? Because I went out of the picture. So long as I'm still, I could fake that. And this is what people do. These are the games they play. So let's see if I can go off the camera. So hopefully you can still hear me. I don't see any indication that so of course I could have stood away from the camera while I was doing this, but it's just kind of awkward. So what I'm going to do is turn the lens around. Whoops. I just pushed the button. Hopefully that didn't do any damage to the video. Alright, so first of all, let's go and just look this way. What I have here. So underneath, oops, I gotta move over here. So this one, in order for me to do this, so there it comes on when I place it in the right position. That one was a little bit more impressive last time than I was doing it this time. I mean, you can see the coil, how mangled it is. But anyway, actually I was looking at this more directly. So I could put coils underneath there. So let's just grab one and see. So you can see, you know, the LED, you know, it's all underneath here as well, right? And I could go underneath the table. So there's my cables underneath the table. You know, there's nothing. Really nice table. So this is the wire for the microphone, and there's, I'll see that on the other side. But so you can go down here. See, look, the LED is still way down here. You know, so there's this whole field here, and we can go above, and you can see it's kind of hard because the light's on. So let me turn the lights off for a minute here. So the camera kind of adjusts to the lighting kind of adjusts. So you can see I'm way up here, right? You know, and then if I touch it, you know, so we can look at this. All these lights, wonderful. Let's go around. Right, so they're all on. Again, it's not very well tuned or anything, but just to show, like this one has somehow come off. Okay, it's kind of disconnected, I guess. You know, so you have all these. So something happened here. I guess these wires are touching each other. I can't really see. Something happened here. Okay, now it's back on. Must have been touching each other. Anyway, so again, we can go like this and go underneath here, and you can see LED's kind of bent. You know, they come on more or less. See, as I turn it, obviously this direction, I'm not going to get any action. So again, we can go up here at this angle, it's kind of hard, the light above it is not showing it very well. But yeah, all the way up here. So I can put all these layers here and go way out. And again, we're only at 64 milliamps, 12 volts. So if I run this at 200 milliamps, this whole area is just transmitting you know, it's just really, really powerful. You can really feel it. So here, everywhere you go, there's a blinding light coming at you. So let's look at this a bit. Okay, well, we can look at the ground besides my papers that I threw on the ground. We just have a power supply here, or sorry, a switch. And it's just coming up here, and I've got this wire right here where you can see I've removed the prongs. Of course, you could always, you know, somehow or another, maybe change the wiring in there and say, well, this is live, Rick. It's the hot wire, and that's what's causing this. But I really wasn't showing anything significant. So look at that, bing. So that was quite dramatic. And it affects all the other coils. Come on, brighter. And if I go the other side, look at that. Goes down. And actually loaded up the coil, the transmit more. So, you know, sometimes gives you a greater gain. Let's look at one that we can look at directly right here. Where is it? Oh, brighter, darker. So it's the same way on the top here. If I put my thumb on the top, on the bottom. See, I'm not as good at the ground as this actual earth ground. So these are all the things that we can do and show. And these are coils that I haven't hooked up to LEDs, which I could, I mean, I had it fold up right here at the meeting. And then I actually put this up there, so if I wanted to put a tray on there and do another, I just kind of ran out of time here because I've got to go somewhere right now. I'm actually late. So what else was I going to show right here? Oh yeah, here's one of my coils here. This was the first one that I did of this size. Actually, this was the first one I did ever. It was the full size, and then I just decided the other day to make it the same inductance. So these two are actually that way, and I'll separate these two. Slightly different size than this tube. Those are just their 6-inch PVCs. So again, you can see close up here the frequency is 1500. So what I'll do right now, I'll show you that I'm not fooling around here, because you can see the frequency changing. Boom, now I just went up in frequency and the lights got brighter without really, so that was a tuning parameter where I was actually lower than I should have been. So you can see just with changing 50 kilohertz, or sorry, 10 kilohertz, the tuning, and then I go out again. So that's really where it wants to be at. So anyway, that shows you directly, obviously, that nothing is externally, you know, influencing this whole setup here, because you can see me actually change it. right? And then of course I can turn it off right here with my hand. Boom, we got nothing. We got light. So what else is there? You can see this gate driver here is just simply the gate driver with two capacitors and associated wires. It's a fast gate driver, and that gives you a gain for the rate of change. The faster the rate of change, the more gain you're going to get. Dramatic with my motors or with this. Much better efficiency. So again, we can look through it at this side. Let's see underneath here. And so you could say, oh, well, Rick, you have something in these pillars, or you have something in the ceiling, or whatever. I mean, you know, well, that wouldn't be changing, the frequency wouldn't be changing with that. So, you know, so we can look at, you know, these are the coils here. It's kind of too bright to look at. Again, this is something that you have to see in person. It's not something that you can't evaluate light through a video, because the lens is going to constantly adapt to the brightness. One thing to be aware of for those customers who have this, really I'm pushing this gate driver more than I should, because it is supposed to be the maximum safe operating area is 9 volts at this frequency, so going to 12 volts is really kind of pushing it. If it was pushing a little bit more amperage, then it would be. But anyway, oh yeah, here's this. You know, this is affecting. So this is this light right here. As I raise and lower it, you can see it affects the input. So what I did in California, well, you can see kind of the problems that I have here with this is come all undone. So we've got a really pathetic looking coil here, transmitter. But in California, I had set this up where we dropped this down really low, and then we just kept adding these loads with these. We had a whole bunch of these ferrite rods, and we would kept adding them, and it would lower the power levels down. And I only say this because this is something that people witnessed. I'm not going to tell you the things that I've done, because you can't verify that apart from it, you know. But anyway, this is something that I showed, and then people could see, wow, we could be adding more and more of these lights, and then the power just keeps dropping. And I had this very power supply in Indiana. I was showing at the expo to like hundreds of people. The running this down to 4 milliamps with the same effect. So I showed that just only a couple months ago, and the California one was last year. So anyway, thanks for watching. I don't know what else to say. Bye.